Hey, warm up on the blow! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Soups with myself, Greg Eaps Peterson, now part of the Beeston Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in a few minutes by Ryan Hammer. Ryan Hammer does such an excellent job taking a look at this great game of college basketball. He is the founder of the Trapezoid of Excellence. He is very much showing off excellence in the way that he covers college basketball. He's very big on TikTok, by the way, so I do have to give him a lot of credit where it is due there. I know that he's doing an amazing job of taking a look at a little bit of everything from this sport, from guys that go from the non-Division I level up to the Division I level. He's been doing a great job of breaking down all these NBA draft picks and so much more if it involves the game of basketball. He is doing an absolutely amazing job of being able to cover it, so we're going to be joined by our good friend Ryan here in a minute, and then in the final segment, going to get you guys a recap of the news and notes we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind that RCM, they meet us on matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions, we do have everything powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to access their funds for all of their gambling-related transactions 24/7, 365 on leap years, 366 days of the year, and you're able to earn cashback rewards as you utilize EdgeBoost. And if you go to edgeboost.bet, put in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That gets you a dollar for dollar match on your first deposit up to $25. Now let's chat with our good friend Ryan, who's doing such a tremendous job over at the Trapezoid of Excellence and so much more. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X and his first and last name, Ryan Hammer, and then 09 all together. And Ryan, it is great to have you aboard. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Happy to have you aboard. I know that you've been doing some great work over on TikTok, the old Instagram, Twitter/X. You've been all over the place with the Trapezoid of Excellence, and what is excellent is just what we've been seeing in terms of these NBA draft decisions. And I'm not sure if you'd agree with me, but I always look at the NBA draft decisions, winners and losers, and ever since we've gotten into the NIL era, there's always seemingly many more winners than losers because these guys that typically would have been late first, early second round picks, it just feels like they're returning to school much more with the money that's available in college basketball.
Yeah, 100%. There is a historically low number of even early draft entrants, but overall draftable prospects in the pool to take this year. But it's kind of having a domino effect. But like you said, it's bringing a lot of talent back to college basketball where guys that aren't for sure locked into first round picks and they're not getting that status that they want to get long-term contracts. They're basically saying, you know what? I have the freedom and the safety of going back to school, trying to get back to that next year and getting a nice little bit of a paycheck before I do that. So guys like Todd Pettiford come to mind right away where maybe he would have gone first rounder, but he wasn't for sure. So
Yep, I'm right there with you. And I think that we should talk about Todd Pettiford because I thought that that was one of the most impactful decisions because if he doesn't return to Auburn, it's not like there's some sort of a bum team or anything like that, but you have to wonder where they'd be going in the backcourt. Certainly Keyshawn Hall picking him up in the offseason was going to help them out, but it felt like Auburn was sticking their chips in the basket of Todd Pettiford being able to come back. They certainly are going to be paying him a lot in NIL, and I think that he was one of the biggest, shall we say, difference makers, not necessarily in terms of a team that might go to the Final Four/national title, but where they would have been without him versus with him.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And when you look at team fit also, he's obviously amazing. He's an unbelievable player, and I'll slate him to be an All-American this year most likely. But the fit he has on the team coming back to, right? Like you said, Auburn needs that one guard. Keyshawn, Kevin Overton, Phil Jovich, all these guys are wings and forwards. They have Caden Magwood coming in, Auburn, who's a freshman, very similar to Tahad actually, but they needed a guy to lead them with the ball in his hands a lot and be a high usage dominant ball guard. And that's what Tahad is and he can be. So I think that it was massive. It's just as big as any other guy decision coming back, as if not bigger than anyone.
Yep, no question about it. I thought that that was absolutely massive, but this one goes back a little bit closer to 24 to 48 hours ago. And the fact that Michigan is going to be able to have Twin Towers once again down low with Yaxel Lendeborg going back, I thought that that was just absolutely massive because I think that you agree with me. The biggest issue that Michigan had last season was the fact that even though they had those two bigs down low, they just really couldn't protect the ball. Bringing in Elliot Cadu in the offseason over from North Carolina, I just really like the blend of this team and out there in a Big Ten where where it's Purdue, and I like what Iowa's done, but I can't say that Iowa's going to be a top 3 team with it being a little bit of a sight unseen. Having Michigan get back Yaxel Lendeborg, I thought was massive for them too.
Yeah, he's great. I slated him as a top 20 prospect, but I understood why some scouts were telling him maybe not sure. I know for a fact, talking to some NBA personnel, they were very polarizing opinions, we'll say, on him, where some teams wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole, and then some teams were all about him, but that's obviously not what he wants to hear. So I think because he was at UAB, they questioned the comp level he was at. They want to see it at the Big Ten level and the national level. So now he goes back. He plays under a coach in Dusty May who did wonders with Danny Wolf last year. And I think Yaxel is going to be in a very similar role because he has that really elite type of versatility that Danny Wolf has. And honestly, and then some. I think Yaxel is probably the most complete player in the entire country in college basketball last year. I think he will be this year. I think he could contend for National Player of the Year. And that's what Michigan was missing, to have that number one dude. Dusty May is maybe the best schematic coach or one of the best schematically sound coaches in the entire country. So it's going to be fun to see what they can do with him.
No question about it. I think that that is going to be tremendous, especially out there in a Big Ten where, like I said, other than Purdue, it feels very wide open. And I think that there's some great inroads to be had there. As joining me on the show, we do have Ryan Hammer. He does such a tremendous job covering this great game of basketball. Joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I do think that we've got ourselves just a really golden age for the SEC as well, because pretty much all the big time moves that we needed to see from the SEC, they landed. Ortega Oweh, he's going to be returning to Kentucky. Now, Boogie Flan did not decide to go back to Arkansas, but he's going to Florida. You want to talk about winners in this process? You get back Alex Condon, you get back Ruben Chinyelu, you get Boogie Flan. Like, that's a home run and a grand slam right there. And for the SEC, I felt like they were big winners over the last week and week and a half, with pretty much all the moves that they were hoping to go their way falling that way.
Yeah, that's what the big NIL dollars do. And no one's got it more than SEC, especially in terms of like parity and spread around the league in the top of the league. But you talked about, I mean, Florida, it could not have gone any better. Thomas Houck didn't even consider going. And then Alex Condon coming back and getting Xavier Lee in the portal and getting Boogie Flan to come back and come in the portal. I mean, and they're going to look amazing. And then you look at other teams, you got Kentucky, Arkansas got Carter Knox back, even though Duke Thiero and Boogie Flan are gone. Arkansas is going to be really good. We talked about Auburn before also. Like, it's going to be a loaded conference again.
Oh, no question about it. I do think that Kentucky is going to be one of the most interesting teams, because I'm sure that you'd agree with me on this. Kentucky had all the backcourt that you could want, but they were lacking a little bit down low with the moves that they made here in the transfer portal, being able to bring in Jaden Quantins, who I felt like was one of the best shot blockers in all of college basketball over at Arizona State last season, bringing back Oweh, who was just a heart and soul piece in that backcourt. Yeah, it's going to lose that. It's going to hurt that they lose Kobe Bryant, such a good sharpshooter for them last season. But I look at this Kentucky team, and now it's season number 2 on Mark Pope, and I think a lot of people lose sight. It was just season number 1 for them. I think that the sky really is the limit for this Kentucky team.
Yeah, they're super deep. Some guys will miss out on PT that probably expected to have a little more, probably a couple of the freshmen, I would imagine, that they really wanted it, but their team is deep. Again, it's very similarly built to last year, in my opinion. It helps getting your leading scorer back because they had zero continuity going from Cal to Pope. Obviously, everyone was gone. They had to fully reset. Now they got at least a couple of guys who were there last year. Brandon Garrison, also Denzel Aberdeen isn't continuity per se, but he played in the SEC, kind of like we talked about Boogie Flan staying in the SEC. Mo Diabate is from the SEC. Cam Williams played at Tulane, so he gets the style down there a little bit. And they're an awesome team. They're going to be a top 10 team in the country, if not right outside the cusp of it. I think it's hard to rank a lot of those SEC teams at the top. I think Florida, given they won the national championship, deserves a little bit of credit above the rest for right now going into the season. But Kentucky's team is as good as it can possibly be, and they need to buff up their defense a little bit if they want to be able to contend for a national title, because it was open season on them last year, and you saw how Tennessee handled that in the NCAA tournament.
Yep, absolutely. I'm right there with you. They're going to need to bulk up that defense, but I do think they're bringing in Quantins. That's going to be a help out a little bit. Mark Pope needs to look in the mirror a little bit on that front, but certainly they've got the pieces to be able to do so. This team, we know that they're going to play defense, and that would be Houston. Now, they do lose with everything that happened over the last few days. Pops Isaacs, and that's going to be big for Texas A&M, a team that I don't know necessarily how it all comes together, but they just flat out have dudes now, so that's going to be a lot of fun. But Milo Suzon, I felt like a lot of people over at Houston thought that he was as good as gone, because as I mentioned, they picked up Isaac, but I thought it was massive that he came back. And now for Houston, this is one of the deepest backcourts that I see in all of college basketball.
Yeah, I mean, Houston's going to do their thing. No matter, you could put me and you at point guard and shooting guard, and Kelvin Sampson's going to find a way to make it work in some way, but not to slight our ability, obviously. But I think having Milos instead of Pop Isaacs is much better for Houston in terms of, because of continuity and buying into the system. I think Pop would have fit fine. He would have been great, but Milo, you see that with the Houston guards year over year. Having a guy like Marcus Sasser a few years ago and Jamal Shead a couple of years ago is means so much to them. LJ Cryer was that for them last year, and all these guys do it in their second or third year at the program and at the school. So having Miles Uzon play next to LJ last year and now become that guy, I think there's ability because he's so good defensively and he's bigger than LJ, bigger frame, better physicality. He can be a Marcus Sasser, Jamal Shead type player. So I agree. I expected him to stay in the draft because of Pop, but also because he said the whole time he wants to go to the NBA. This is his chance. He sees that vision. But Otego Way said the same thing, and he went back to Kentucky also. So sometimes guys don't get the draft stock back from the scouts and teams that they want to hear initially. So they come back. I love it for Houston. I think it's actually beneficial for Milos. I think this is a chance that he could actually break out. And like I said, be a Sasser and Shed guy who got drafted in the late first or early second.
Yep, and one of the residuals of that, I alluded to it, the fact that Pop Isaacs now goes on over to Texas A&M, and I think that that's a lost ripple effect in all this. How do you take a look at a Texas A&M team where I look at the build of the roster, and it just doesn't feel like the same roster that Bucky McMillan had over at Samford, because when he was over at Samford, it was all about creating a bunch of turnovers, whole bunch of guys that shoot threes, and he does have that. And by the way, Mackenzie Mbakbo, he was the guy that was in the NBA draft. He now heads on over to Texas A&M because we withdrew as well. So, I take a look at this A&M team. I'm not quite sure how it looks, but the one thing I know is that they've got a lot of talent, and Bucky McMillan has had a lot of success early on at the Division I level.
Yeah, I think they'll be good. Bucky, this year, they struggled a little bit, Sanford, but they were still good. Last year, they were obviously amazing. They were really good, especially for their quality, but his system, his style will work with the right talent. A&M's got money to spend. They have a pretty attractive recruiting regime, especially in the SEC. So you see the roster he got. I talked about Mbako and Pop Isaacs. I know Rylan Griffin's going there, and Jakari Lane and Rashawn Agee, and they have a bunch of guys now and talent that Bucky has never been able to have before. They had guys like a Chore before, but I don't think that's really scratching the surface of what he'll have here. Obviously, it's not going to be easy in the SEC. I'm not sure how good they can be or will be so soon, but it'll be fun to watch. And I'm really keen to see what Bucky can do as an up and coming coach in a massive conference, because we didn't expect this change to happen for him so quickly. Eventually, he was going to get a big time power job, but only because of Kevin Willard's debacle with Maryland is the reason why Bucky was able to make that jump this year. It was late in the process, so I think that kind of bites him in the butt a little bit. It makes it tougher for him to recruit and bring guys in, but he has a solid team, so we'll see what he can do.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm glad that he's getting this opportunity. Like you said, it might take a little bit of transition to go from being out there in the SoCon conference on over to the SEC. That's a big giant leap for any coach to make. But I do think that if there's a guy that can make it, it is Mr. McMillan. As joining me on the show, we've got Ryan Hammer right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I think that this is interesting to dive in on as well, because I mentioned it. There were a lot of winners with regards to the NBA draft decisions, with regards to the NBA draft process. But was there a team or two that you felt like, man, they maybe got an unexpected loss and maybe the process just didn't go so well for them?
You know, it's funny, like you said before, where most teams you see win more winners than losers. In general, I think that's more of the positive culture around like the nature of the sport, especially in the offseason. But now with NIL and the transfer portal and everything, like people focus on the winners more than they do the losers. I don't see a ton of like major losers. There was no one that really like stood out to me as like, oh, like this is going to be a problem. I think Texas Tech had a great offseason. The Darian Williams debacle was strange and a little bit weird, I guess I'll say. And I thought there was never a chance he was going to come back to there. After he entered the portal, entered the draft, like he was never going to come back. I'd say Kansas, I guess, because they were in the mix for a bunch of guys like Darian Williams. They were heavily in the mix on. They thought they were going to get him, and they thought they were going to get Dame Sarr, who wasn't a draft prospect, obviously, but he was a domino of the draft decisions with guys like Cedric Coward staying in the draft. So that spot opens up at Duke for a guy like him to go there, and then he kind of burns Kansas, and then Darian Williams says, I'm going to go to NC State, and then it kind of leaves Kansas in the dust.
And I do think that there's one that comes to mind for me that you did not mention there. It is Duke, who you just mentioned at the back end with Cedric Coward. I mean, it's just an incredible story. Myself being from UW Oshkosh, a D3 guy, I love it when I see a guy go from D3 to Division I, and now is probably going to be like either a late first, early second round pick. I do think that for Duke, they obviously lose out a little bit here. They did a nice job of being able to replace him, and I felt like at the end of the process, they knew that he was going to be as good as gone. But that was one thing that really intrigued me, the fact that Cedric Coward, after being injured for much of the season, now all of a sudden is probably going to be becoming a first-round draft pick, and already committed to Duke, but has decided to remain in the draft.
Yeah, Duke will be just fine. I think Dame Charles is a good replacement. They have somewhat different skill sets, but Again, even without both of them, Duke would be just fine. Their team's going to be awesome. And obviously with Cedric, maybe they have a little bit of a higher ceiling, but it's still a team that can win the national title. And it's awesome for Cedric. Like you said, I'm a former D3 athlete also. And I think people underestimate different levels of every sport, but definitely in basketball. And some people are late bloomers. Some people, things happen. You have no idea in their personal life. And it's just not easy to find the path so quickly, like a lot of other big time prospects and big time recruits. But Cedric Howard's a hard worker. He's super intelligent. If you ever talk to him or ever hear him speak at all, I'm really happy for him. It's an awesome story. And he's probably going to end up a first round pick. So to go from D3 to a first round pick in 3 years is unbelievable.
Now, this leads me to this very important question. Which D3 university are you from? Because I'm a UW Oshkosh guy.
I am Arcadia University out in Glenside, Pennsylvania.
Oh, a part of the Mac Freedom Conference, if I'm not mistaken. Good, clean family fun right there. We are part of the WEAC out here with UW Oshkosh, so I know all too well about that. So always great to get a fellow D3 alum on this podcast. Ryan, you do such an excellent job taking a look at this great game of college basketball. You're out there on the Twitter/X, Instagram, TikTok, we name it, you do it. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you. I know people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
I appreciate you having me for sure. It's always fun to do off-season stuff, and this is one of the pivotal days and weeks of the year in the college basketball off-season for sure. So we definitely are doing this at the perfect time with the deadline tonight as we're recording and all. But no, everywhere, like you said, every platform, YouTube stuff I've been working on, and we got a podcast in the works for the college basketball season. It'll probably come around mid-August, so we'll be on the lookout for that.
Absolutely. Ryan doing such a great job covering this great game of basketball, looking at the NBA draft decisions, looking at what we've all gotten in the offseason, and so much more. So big thanks to Ryan for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, it is that time of the podcast to give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball on Wednesday. Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peters, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Big thanks to Ryan Ammer for joining me. He does an absolutely amazing job covering this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. I know that he's got the trapezoid of excellence. I know that he is excellent as well, and every single time we're able to get him aboard, I'm going to take full advantage. This was the first time that he joined me on this podcast, and I am glad that he did. Big thanks to Ryan for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. This was a big one. Ortega away. He decided that he was going to be going back to Kentucky, and he is going to be withdrawing from the NBA draft. This was one of the biggest decisions out there, and it's as I've been saying on this podcast, it does feel like with NBA draft winners and losers over the last 3-4 off seasons ever since NIL came into the fold, there's been a lot more winners than there have been losers, as Oweh last season, 16 points per contest, was able to shoot in that neighborhood of about 35.5% from three-point range, did a nice job being able to pull in there about 4.5 rebounds per game at 6'5", was able to do just a little bit of this and that. And for Kentucky, it really does round out what I think is going to be an amazing team, because they did a nice job being able to beef up this offseason down low, which that was really the biggest issue that they had. Bringing in Jaden Quantance is big. Jalen Lowe is a nice passer that doesn't necessarily have the world's greatest shot from three-point range, so Oweh does a nice job of being able to balance that out. Now, moving on for Kobe Brea is going to be a little bit tough for this team, but you saw Brandon Garrison, who's able to do a rock-solid job down low. Malachi Moreno, who at 7 feet tall is coming in as a freshman, he's going to be good. Jasper Johnson. This is going to be a pretty incredible team out there in the SEC. So that was a big one. We did see Jameer Watkins stay in the NBA draft. So any team that was hoping to be able to get him in the transfer portal, that's a little bit of an issue. He was really that top guy over at Florida State. It was really the lone guy over at Florida State that was giving you a relatively rock solid effort. So that is going to be a little bit rough. We shall see how some of these teams are going to be taking a look there. And then we also saw withdrawing from the NBA draft Todd Pettiford, who I thought that he was going to be a first-round pick. Like, there's a lot of NIL money that is going to be coming his way to go back to Auburn, and for Auburn, they are very fortunate to be having him back, because as a freshman last season, I know that it was a little bit hit or miss throughout the season with Pettiford, but it felt like after he had a few struggles to begin SEC play, he was able to pick it up once again. He was a north of a 37% three-point shooter, a guy that was able to give you double figures, played really well on the defensive side of things as well. Pettiford, just a very complete player. Now, as we know with Auburn, this is going to be a little bit of a new look team, because Gianni Broom, who was doing such a great job of cleaning up down low, he is gone after about 500 100 years in college basketball and showing off a credit card vertical at the NBA Draft Combine. But you know what? You've got Keyshawn Hall who comes in after being a nice 6'7", do-it-all sort of player over at Central Florida. Keyshawn Murphy, he's a nice guy that's going to be able to help him out down low. And Abdul Bashir, I think, is going to be a really nice shooter for this team as well. So Auburn, they're going to be looking quite a bit different than they did a season ago, especially with Chad Baker-Mazara being out. But he's going to be able to be a nice focal point for this offense. It's going to be a team with a lot of stretchability, a lot of versatility, and I do like where Auburn is heading. So that's a big one for them. As of the time of this podcast, we still have a few guys that have yet to go off the board. You got RJ Lewis, who, if he does decide that he is going to be going back to school, he's going to be in the transfer portal, so we shall see what happens there. Abdou Thiero is still hanging in the balance for Arkansas. I would think that he's going to be going back to Arkansas. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't. Not in Coda Niederhauser. Is he true 7-footer? If he does return to school, he's going to be heading back to Penn State. And then Miles Byrd was over at San Diego State. I would not think that Miles Byrd is going to be staying in the NBA draft. Now, I could be wrong on that one, but that's up for Miles Byrd. I think that he's going to be able to return with Reese Dixon Waters being back in the full for San Diego State. Byrd last year was solid, 12.5 points, shot about 30% from three, 6'7", a little bit of a combo player that began his career just coming in off the bench for San Diego State. I just can't see a way in which he stays in the NBA draft, and if he does return to San Diego State, that's going to be pretty rock solid for them. But overall, we did see a lot of big-time NBA draft decisions there, and we also saw some big-time portal updates, as well as we did see coming off the board, Tyon Graham-Foster going to Gonzaga. Now, for Tyon Graham-Foster, he was miserably bad from three-point range last season. I'm talking 20% from three-point range bad, but that said, he's able to stuff the stat sheet, 15 points, 6 boards, 2 assists, block and a half, steal and a half per contest. This is big for a Gonzaga team that I was wondering what they were doing here in the offseason, because I didn't think that Gonzaga was going to be adding 500 billion guys or anything like that, but they needed to add someone after last year. Let's call it what it is. They didn't necessarily live up to expectations. They do lose a few guys here in the offseason, as I'm sure that they were going to be looking to build a little bit more around Michael Ajayi after he had a rough season last year, so they were unable to really do that. We saw Kayleigh Battle just be I thought he was going to be a more consistent shooter for that team, because he was able to give them scoring, but his three-point shot was just a little bit off kilter all season long last year. Being able to bring back Graham Ike, obviously big, and they did bring in Adam Miller along Jalen Worley. Worley's never been too much of a scorer, though. Adam Miller, he had a nice three-point shot over at Arizona State last season, but he's been inconsistent throughout his career. Now, the fact that they've got the man of steel, Steel Venters, coming back, that's going to be able to help them out as well. So I do think that this is a very interesting team. Being able to get and add like this, and Tyon Graham-Foster really helps out so many different aspects of things. Prince Alajibi, he was over at Seton Hall last year. He has decided that he is going to be going to Southern Illinois. He was a pretty rock-solid player last season. He was able to average 8 points, 3.5 rebounds per game, and I know that at Portal_updates posted that he is going to be joining his brother Rollins Alajibi over at Southern Illinois, so that's a little bit of a part of it, and this is a massive pickup for a Southern Illinois team. Now, let's call it what it is. The defense was very suspect for them last season. They did round into form, and I've always been a big stan of Scott Nagy. Scott Nagy, I believe, knows what the heck he's doing as a coach. I do think that that defensive effort is going to be a little bit better this year, though I'll say even when he was at Wright State, not necessarily like they were the Mona Lisa Vitos of defense, but bringing in Isaiah Stafford, who was the top scorer over Valparaiso 2 seasons ago, that's big. Quilron House, he was over at Jacksonville State last season. He knows how to be able to play some defense. Now you bring in Alajibi. I really like the way that this roster is filling out in the Missouri Valley Conference in general, having a pretty nice offseason thus far. And then this is a nice one as well. Marvin McGee, he is going to be going on over to UT Rio Grande Valley. Grand Valley made some inroads last year with Hassan Abdul Hakim going down with an injury. That really derailed the progress that they were making. But for Marvin McGee, a guy that was able to give you about 10 points, 3.5 rebounds per game, he was a nice number 3 option for Bakersfield last season. I think that he's going to step in right away, have a lot of success out there in the Southland. And for Mr. McGee, from three-point range last season, he was also able to be pretty solid. He was able to stretch out the floor a little bit for this bunch, so I do think that he's going to be able to give you quite a bit, so I like that pickup for them. And then you also had William Wharton. He was over at South Dakota State. He has decided that he's going to be going to Memphis now. if Memphis is looking to William Wharton for a lot of minutes, I don't know what to tell you. He averaged 3 points and 3 rebounds per game, but he's heading on over to Memphis. I have to think that this is a walk-on situation. Congratulations to him. Congratulations to Memphis for having another body that they could utilize during practice. So yay verily there, and yay verily to the fact that we've got a lot to cover in college basketball right now. I'm getting you set for what is going to be the most tremendous college basketball season ever. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep it by and letters EM. The naming does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And a big thanks once again to Ryan Hammer for joining me in the last segment and coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.